Okay everybody, today's episode of the Conquest of the World by the Cactus, Cacti, Cactuses, whatever world you want to use, is Chapter 7, which is the Mosaic period, Chapter 8, the reaction of the Jewish idea, and Chapter 9, the Roman period. And there's a kind of interesting little argument here, in which Osman Bey, aka Frederick Millingen, argues that the Mosaic period, the period under Moses, was a kind of exception to the Jewish principle, in which they went through conquest in the normal way and they wanted to be a proud nation. The reaction to the Jewish idea is effectively that there was a counter argument within the Jewish people, and when we talk about the Jews, obviously they're not a monolith, and as we see in the left and right paradigm within Jews these days, they don't all agree with each other. The disagreement at this time was between becoming a nation, an honourable nation, or dominating the world through what Osman Bey, Millingen, describes as material interests. It appears that the material interests won out. The last chapter is the Roman period, in which he says once this idea had triumphed, it was actually beneficial for the Jews to be spread throughout the world. They didn't actually need a state. So when the second temple was destroyed in 70 AD, it didn't matter because they were already all over the Roman Empire. So I think it's a very interesting book, and for anyone who, for the censors and for anyone who accuses me of being some kind of prejudiced hater, my broad reason for doing this is the battle for power in the 19th century that gave rise to events in the 20th century. I want to understand this. Now, there are various conspiratorial groups: the Illuminati, the Jesuits, the Freemasons, the black nobility, and you can't possibly ignore the Jews. And really, this book by Millingen or Osman Bey is so interesting because it's the first open admittance of the change in Jewish power since the emancipation of the Jews, first by Napoleon in the late 18th, early 19th century, and then progressively through all the European countries. So it's very, very interesting, and now it is noticed. And Osman Bey, Frederick Millingen, who was the son of an English doctor, and he was born in Constantinople, is kind of points this out from a kind of Anglo-Islamic point of view, which is also very interesting. So we're dealing with a historical artifact, and in many respects he's the first Gentile to do this, and this is why I think it's interesting. In the 1840s, Benjamin Disraeli, who was later to become the first Jewish Prime Minister of Great Britain, wrote a book called Königsby, in which his Rothschild character, Sidonia, talks about the growth of Jewish power. In the 1850s or perhaps 1860s, Karl Marx, who was also a Jew, wrote his essay, I can't remember exactly what it's called now, on the Jewish question, but Jews were writing about this already. Moses Hess had already written Roman Jerusalem, so there were definite changes in power. I think this is all interesting, but the Conquest of the World by the Cactus is the first Gentile attempt at doing an analysis of this change. That's why I think it's an interesting book. It's not about hating, it's about analysing, understanding. Anyway, here we go. I'm going to read the 3 chapters to you now. Hope you enjoy them. I think they're very, as I said, it's fascinating stuff. 7. The Mosaic period. This second period signalises a total revolution in the policy of the Jewish people. The changes introduced by Moses were nothing but a formal abjuration of the Jewish principle. This revolution did completely away with the chief motive principle of the Jewish people, the principle of material interests, in order to put in its place a new one, formed out of a union of the physical and theocratic principles. This change was the result of a reaction which had taken place in the minds of the men who guided the fate of the chosen people. These noble men shuddered as they beheld their race lowering itself so far as to indulge in highway robbery and usury. A people, thought they, which pretends to belong to the foremost of nations, must enter openly and honestly upon the career which leads to prosperity and civilization. It must declare as unworthy of its aims a principle of cowardice which, in the eyes of mankind, deserves excommunication. But the victory of the Mosaic idea could be secured only by the complete extinction of the adherents of the old Jewish idea. They were therefore annihilated, together with their golden calf, the symbol of the spirit of usury, which is the same as the principle of material interests. The application of the principle of conquest by armed force led to the occupation of Canaan and the foundation of the kingdom of Judah. But as this period serves only to explain the application of a principle which lies not within the scope of our essay, we shall resume the thread of our investigation from the time when the kingdom of Judah vanished, in order to make room again for the reappearance of the Jewish idea, that is, the principle of material interests. 8. Reaction of the Jewish idea. With the fall of the kingdom of Judah, its stay and support, the principle of physical force fell also, and the Jews again turned their eyes towards that peculiarly Jewish principle, which was to secure them the conquest of the world, the principle of material interests. When they were attacked by the Assyrians and Persians, there was perhaps still a party amongst the Jews which held a conquest by armed force possible, but this party was soon silenced by the adherents of the old idea. These latter partisans maintained that if the prophecies were to be fulfilled, and the sons of Israel were to acquire the conquest of the world, such an object could not be accomplished by the application of arms, but only by the application of the principle of material interests. What use is it to us, said they, to possess a country of our own, a kingdom, fortresses and armies, which a single storm can destroy in a moment, making us the slaves of a conqueror? No, the Mosaic principle may appear beautiful, but it is only a chimera. Our riches and our power must not be concentrated at one point. They must be everywhere and nowhere, so that they cannot become the prey of our enemies. No country, no kingdom must be our own, but we must try to possess ourselves of the riches of all the countries and of all the empires of the world. Scattered over the whole face of the earth, we must possess no fixed habitation, but hurry towards those spots where the harvest is most bountiful. Only through the principle indicated by Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and only in this manner can and will the prophecies be fulfilled, which promise to the sons of Israel the conquest of the world. The conflict between these two principles divided the Jewish nation into two parties, which a long time struggled for supremacy. The consequence of this conflict was that the Jews saw themselves at one time forced to determine upon a cosmopolitan emigration, and at another time felt drawn again towards Zion, the visible central point of their nationality. The tendency towards decentralization held at a certain time the upper hand, and became the cause of that emigration, which is known under the name of the Babylonian captivity. But this captivity was in fact nothing else than an aggressive movement on the part of the Jews, having for its object to reduce their conquerors to subjection by means of cunning and usury. Beaten on the field of policy and war, the Jews endeavoured to repay themselves by plundering the Assyrians, and it is a fact that once established in the centre of the Assyrian Empire, the Jews possessed themselves of the riches of the country, and finally laid their grasp even on its administration and political power. This victory was accomplished by the assistance of the intrigues of Esther and Mordecai, who used the old king Ahasuerus as their tool, taking the reins of the state into their own hands. 9. The Roman period. The conquest of Judea by the Romans gave a decisive direction to the cosmopolitan tendency of the Jews. They now penetrated into all the eastern and western provinces of the Roman Empire. In all countries they soon stole amongst their conquerors, and the vassals of those conquerors, and preyed upon them with cunning and usury to their heart's content. It is to this influx of the Jews, as well as to their rebellious spirit, that we must ascribe the hatred which the Romans began to cherish towards them. When this hatred had reached its climax, the Romans undertook that campaign which had in view the destruction of a race that had grown to be a real plague of the empire. The campaign of Titus was intended to destroy the capital of the Jewish people, regarded by the Romans as the point of action of the Jewish race. But this campaign missed its intended purpose, and for this reason. Jerusalem had long since ceased to be the central point of action of the Jewish nationality. For amongst the Jews, the movement of cosmopolitan decentralization had long ago taken the place of the system of centralization, and the principles of physical force had given way to the principle of material interests. This change having taken place, the Jews had no longer use for the fortresses of Judea and the walls of Jerusalem in their aggressive movement. They had already boldly assumed the offensive on all points, and had concluded to employ in their project of the conquest of the world only the weapons of cunning and usury. Moreover, Roman policy committed a great mistake when it turned its arms against a point, the destruction whereof could no longer weaken the Jewish power. For the Jews, having long ago exchanged their point of action for a principle, that principle now constituted their sole basis of operations, and the Romans ought to have fought and annihilated that principle. But such an undertaking was not within the power of the Romans, and Titus, in destroying Jerusalem, destroyed the only obstacle in the way of the Jews for a free aggressive movement upon all other nations. From that moment, the Jewish people forever renounced their native country and their mosaic tradition, and began the great work of conquering the world by means of the principle of material interest. Okay, so that section is very interesting, isn't it? He's mentioning the Jewish people forever renouncing their native country. Obviously, this isn't what happened in the second half of the 19th century, and obviously in 1917, the Balfour Declaration was signed, and 40 years later, Israel would come into existence. So the Rothschilds had a number of plans that Osman Bey wasn't aware of, which is why I think it's interesting to look at this piece of work. It's a time capsule. It's a very interesting historical artifact. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back on the main channel talking about something interesting, I hope. It's a lovely day today, as you can see from the sun on my face. So make sure you have a great day and look after yourselves.